Hello everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The first time I stepped inside. Have you ever walked into a building and felt like you were entering a different world? A world where the air is quieter, the light is softer, and the very atmosphere seems to demand respect? That was me, standing in the doorway of my local public library in California. Feeling like I was about to step into a sacred place I wasn't sure I was worthy to enter. I remember that day so clearly. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. My children were at school. My husband was at work. And I was alone, wandering the streets of my neighborhood, feeling lost in a way that had nothing to do with directions. I had been living in America for 2 years, and I still felt like a stranger. My English was still broken. My confidence was still shattered. I still made mistakes every time I opened my mouth. And on that particular afternoon, I found myself standing in front of a building I had walked past 100 times but never entered. The public library. It was a beautiful building, with tall windows and a grand entrance that reminded me of the temples in my home country. I had always wanted to go inside, but I was too scared. Too scared of the silence. Too scared of the judgment. Too scared of not understanding the signs, the rules, the unspoken expectations. But that day, something pushed me forward. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the rain, and I needed shelter. I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. And I froze. The silence hit me first. Not an empty silence. A full silence. A silence filled with the rustle of pages, the soft hum of computers, the distant sound of footsteps on carpet. It was a silence that demanded respect. A silence that made you feel like you were in the presence of something greater than yourself. I stood in the entrance, dripping rainwater onto the clean floor, feeling like an intruder. The library was massive. Rows upon rows of books stretched out before me, disappearing into the distance. People were sitting at tables, reading, studying, working. Children were curled up in corners with picture books. A woman was helping an elderly man find a book on the computer. And everyone was quiet. So quiet. In my country, libraries were noisy places. People talked, laughed, argued. Books were a luxury, not a right. But here, in America, the library felt different. It felt like a temple. A temple of knowledge. A place where ideas were sacred. And I, with my broken English and my foreign accent, felt like I was trespassing on holy ground. I took a step back, ready to leave. And then, a voice spoke. "Can I help you?" I turned to see a woman in a cardigan, wearing glasses and a warm smile. She was a librarian. And the look on her face said something I didn't expect. It said, "You belong here." A quiet shock. Have you ever walked into a place and felt like you were holding your breath, not because you had to, but because the atmosphere demanded it? Like the very air was sacred and you didn't want to disturb it with your noisy existence? That was exactly how I felt, standing in that library, dripping rainwater onto the floor. While this woman in a cardigan looked at me with a smile that said, "Welcome home." I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. The silence of the library was so complete that even my voice felt like an intrusion. In my home country, libraries were never like this. They were loud, chaotic places where students argued over textbooks and children ran between the shelves. The concept of a quiet library was completely foreign to me. But here, in this beautiful American library, silence was the rule. And it was overwhelming. The librarian, whose name I would later learn was Mrs. Thompson, didn't seem bothered by my silence. She just waited patiently, her warm smile never fading. And then she said something that made me feel like I could breathe again. She said, "It's okay. Take your time." Not, "Can I help you?" Not, "What are you looking for?" She said, "Take your time." She saw that I was struggling. She saw that I was scared. And she gave me permission to just be. I finally managed to speak. I'm sorry. My English. I'm learning. I don't know. I don't know how. I stumbled over every word, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. But Mrs. Thompson just nodded slowly and said, "You're doing great. Your English is better than you think." And then she did something unexpected. She walked over to a shelf, pulled out a book, and handed it to me. It was a children's book. A picture book. The kind you would read to a 5-year-old. "Start here," she said. Simple words. Beautiful pictures. You can read this. I stared at the book in my hands, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Embarrassment. I was a grown woman, and she was giving me a children's book. But also gratitude. Because she wasn't judging me. She was meeting me where I was. She was saying, "This is your starting point. And that's okay." I took the book and whispered, "Thank you." And as I walked to a quiet corner of the library to sit and read, I realized something profound. This library, this temple of silence, wasn't a place of judgment. It was a place of acceptance. It was a place where everyone was welcome, no matter their language, their accent, their mistakes. It was a place where knowledge was sacred, and the pursuit of it was honored. But just when I thought I understood what this place was, I discovered something that surprised me even more. Something that made me realize that libraries in America were not just about books. They were about something much bigger. The librarian who saw me. Have you ever felt completely invisible to the world, like you could walk through a crowd and no one would notice you? And then one person looked at you and made you feel like you were the only person in the room? That was Mrs. Thompson, the librarian who saw me not as a foreigner with broken English, but as a person who was brave enough to try. I sat in that quiet corner of the library, holding the children's book Mrs. Thompson had given me. The pages were filled with simple sentences and beautiful illustrations. The cat is on the mat. The dog is in the yard. I read each sentence slowly, whispering the words to myself, feeling the shape of them on my tongue. And for the first time in months, I felt something other than frustration. I felt progress. Mrs. Thompson came over to check on me after a while. She didn't rush me or ask if I was done. She just sat down beside me, quietly, and said, "How is it going?" I looked up at her, and I started crying. Not big, dramatic sobs. Just silent tears rolling down my cheeks. Because I didn't know how to tell her what I was feeling. I didn't know how to say, "For 2 years, I have felt like a failure. For 2 years, I have felt invisible. For 2 years, I have been too scared to even try. And you gave me a children's book and made me feel like I was enough." I managed to whisper, "Thank you." And then I added, "I'm sorry. I'm crying. I don't know why." But Mrs. Thompson did know why. She reached over and patted my hand gently. "You're crying because you've been holding it in for a long time," she said. "And this is the first time you've let yourself breathe." In that moment, I realized something. I had been so focused on perfecting my English that I had forgotten why I was learning it in the first place. I wasn't learning English to impress anyone. I was learning it to connect. To understand. To be understood. And Mrs. Thompson understood me without needing perfect English. She understood my tears. She understood my silence. She understood my struggle. And she didn't judge me for any of it. I came back to the library the next day. And the day after that. And the day after that. I became a regular. I read children's books, then young adult novels, then simple adult books. I attended the library's ESL conversation group, where I practiced speaking English with other immigrants. And with every visit, my English improved. But more importantly, I improved. My confidence grew. My loneliness faded. I started to feel like I belonged. Mrs. Thompson would always greet me with a smile and a simple question. "What are you reading today?" And I would tell her. And she would listen. She always listened. But then one day, she told me something that made me realize the library was not just a building with books. It was something much deeper. Something sacred. Finding my voice in silence. Have you ever been so afraid of saying the wrong thing that you said nothing at all? So afraid of your accent, your grammar, your mistakes, that you convinced yourself it was better to stay silent than to risk being judged? That was me, before the library taught me the most important lesson about language, that silence isn't the absence of voice. Sometimes, it's the space where your voice learns to grow. I kept coming back to the library. Every day. Rain or shine. It became my sanctuary, my refuge, my place of peace. Mrs. Thompson would always greet me with that warm smile, and I would always find my corner, my chair, my quiet space. And I would read. I started with children's books, then moved on to young adult novels, then simple adult books. Each page was a victory. Each sentence was a step forward. But there was one thing I still couldn't do. I couldn't speak. I could read, silently. I could understand, mostly. But when it came to actually opening my mouth and making sounds, I froze. The fear was too strong. The shame was too deep. I was terrified of my accent, my mistakes, my foreignness. So I stayed silent. And I watched others speak instead. There was an ESL conversation group that met at the library every Tuesday evening. I would sit in the back, pretending to read, and I would listen. I listened to immigrants from all over the world, Mexico, China, Russia, Brazil, Vietnam, trying to speak English, making mistakes, laughing at themselves, and slowly, bravely, improving. And I wanted to join them. I wanted to speak. But I couldn't. Not yet. Then one day, Mrs. Thompson sat down beside me and said, "I've noticed you sitting in the back of the ESL group. Why don't you join?" I shook my head, my cheeks burning. "I can't," I whispered. "My English is terrible. They will laugh at me." Mrs. Thompson looked at me with those kind eyes and said something that changed my entire perspective. She said, "No one will laugh at you. They will respect you. Because they know how hard it is. They've been exactly where you are." I thought about her words. And I realized she was right. The people in that group weren't perfect English speakers. They were learners. Just like me. They were brave enough to try. And if they could be brave, maybe I could too. The next Tuesday, I sat with the group for the first time. Not in the back. In the circle. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands were shaking. But I was there. And when it was my turn to speak, I opened my mouth and said, "My name is. I am from. I like." My words were broken. My accent was thick. I made mistakes in every single sentence. But no one laughed. No one judged. They smiled. They nodded. They said, "Good job. Keep going." And I did. I kept going. Because for the first time in 3 years, I was not silent. I was speaking. I was finding my voice. And it was the most beautiful feeling in the world. But the real surprise came later that night, when I discovered that the library had a secret. A secret that would make me see these walls as more than just a building. A secret that would teach me the ultimate truth about why U.S. libraries are like temples. Books as bridges. Have you ever smelled something that instantly transported you back to a memory you thought you'd forgotten? A scent so powerful that you could see faces, hear voices, feel emotions from years ago? That's what happened to me one afternoon in the library, when I found a book that smelled like my grandmother's house. And in that moment, I realized that books aren't just paper and ink. They're bridges. I was browsing the shelves, looking for something new to read, when I came across a section I had never noticed before. International languages. My heart skipped a beat. I ran my fingers along the spines, reading titles in Spanish, French, Chinese, Russian. And then I saw it. A book in my native language. I pulled it off the shelf with trembling hands and opened it. The smell hit me first. The familiar scent of old paper and ink, the kind of smell that reminded me of my grandmother's house, of lazy afternoons reading on her porch, of a life I had left behind. And then I saw the words. My language. The words I had grown up with, dreamed in, loved in. I started to cry. Right there, in the middle of the library, surrounded by strangers, I cried. Because I had been so focused on learning English that I had forgotten the beauty of my own language. I had been so determined to fit in that I had erased parts of myself. And here, in this American library, I found a piece of my home. I sat down and read that book cover to cover. It wasn't a famous book. It wasn't a classic. It was a simple story about a family, about love, about loss, about hope. But it was mine. It was my culture. It was my past. And reading it made me feel whole again. When I finished, I went to Mrs. Thompson and showed her the book. I didn't know you had books in my language, I said, my voice shaking. She smiled. We have books in many languages, she said. Because libraries are for everyone. Not just for people who speak English. For everyone. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Books are bridges. They connect us to our past, our culture, our identity. They also connect us to the future, to new ideas, to different perspectives. And the library, this temple of knowledge, honored that. It honored every language, every culture, every story. I started reading in my native language again. I read to my children in my language. I started to feel proud of my heritage, not ashamed of it. And my English improved too. Because when you feel whole, when you feel seen, when you feel connected, you can learn anything. But the most beautiful discovery was still to come. Because the library had a secret. A secret that would change the way I saw this building forever. A secret that would teach me why U.S. libraries are truly like temples. A sanctuary for my children. Have you ever watched your children discover a place and felt your heart swell with joy because you knew, with absolute certainty, that they were safe? That they belonged? That they were home? That was me, standing in the children's section of the library, watching my son and daughter run their little fingers along the shelves. Their eyes wide with wonder, their laughter echoing softly in the sacred space that had become my sanctuary. I had been coming to the library for months. It had become my refuge, my place of peace, my second home. But I had never brought my children. I was too scared. Too scared that they would be too loud, too energetic, too much for this quiet, sacred place. Too scared that they would embarrass me, that I would have to shush them, that the librarians would judge me for being a bad mother. So I kept them away. I kept this beautiful place to myself. And then one day, Mrs. Thompson asked me a question that changed everything. Why don't you bring your children, she said. We have a wonderful children's section. Story time. Crafts. They would love it. I opened my mouth to make an excuse. They're too loud. They won't be able to sit still. I don't want to bother anyone. But Mrs. Thompson just smiled and said, libraries are for everyone. Children included. That's why we have a children's section. They're allowed to be children here. I thought about her words. And I realized that I had been hiding not just from the world, but from my own children. I had been so focused on my own struggles, my own fear, my own shame, that I had forgotten to share this beautiful place with them. So the next Saturday, I brought them. My daughter, 7 years old, and my son, 5. They walked into the library holding my hands, their eyes wide with wonder. "Mommy," my daughter whispered, "it's so quiet." I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yes, sweetheart. We have to be quiet in here." But as we walked into the children's section, something amazing happened. The space was magical. Colorful rugs. Bright posters. Bookshelves at their height. Puppets and puzzles and comfortable cushions. And the librarian, a young woman with glasses and a warm smile, greeted them like old friends. "Welcome," she said. "We have story time in 10 minutes. Would you like to join?" My children looked at me, their eyes full of hope. And I nodded. We sat on the colorful rug with other families, and the librarian read a story. My children were mesmerized. They laughed at the funny parts. They gasped at the surprises. They leaned forward, completely captivated. And I watched them, my heart overflowing with gratitude. In that moment, I realized that the library was not just for me. It was for them. It was a sanctuary for all of us. A place where we could learn, grow, and belong. The library was teaching my children something important. It was teaching them that knowledge is sacred. That learning is a gift. That they belong, no matter where they come from. And as we walked home that evening, my daughter said something that would stay with me forever. Something that would teach me the ultimate lesson about why libraries are truly like temples. The community within walls. Have you ever walked into a room full of strangers and felt like you had found your tribe? People who didn't know your name but understood your struggle? People who spoke different languages but shared the same hope? That was the ESL conversation group at the library, a community within walls that taught me something more valuable than English. It taught me that I was not alone. I had been attending the ESL group for weeks. Every Tuesday evening, I would walk into that small meeting room, my heart pounding, my hands sweating. And I would sit in the circle with people from all over the world. Maria from Mexico. Chen from China. Yuri from Russia. Ahmed from Egypt. We were all different. We had different skin colors, different religions, different cultures. But we shared one thing, the courage to try. We would practice conversations. Simple ones at first. What is your name? Where are you from? What do you do? And as we practiced, something beautiful happened. We became friends. We started sharing our stories. Maria told us about leaving her family behind. Chen told us about the pressure to succeed. Yuri told us about the loneliness of being so far from home. And I told them about my fear, my shame, my struggle with English. And they understood. Because they had felt it too. The library had given us more than just books. It had given us each other. It had created a community. A community of learners, of dreamers, of people who refused to give up. Mrs. Thompson would sometimes join our group. She would sit with us, listen to us, encourage us. And she would tell us something that I still think about today. She said, "This library is not just a building with books. It's a gathering place. A place where people come to find themselves. A place where people come to find each other." I thought about her words. And I realized she was right. The library was a community center. It was a place where children learned to read, where teenagers studied for exams, where adults improved their English, where seniors found companionship. It was a place where everyone was welcome, no matter their background, their language, or their mistakes. I started attending other events at the library. Story time with my children. Author readings. Book clubs. And with every event, I felt more and more connected. I felt like I was becoming part of something bigger than myself. I was becoming part of a community. And then, one evening, after the ESL group had ended, Maria took me aside and said something that surprised me. She said, "You know, you speak English better than you think. You just don't believe in yourself." And I realized that the library had given me something I had been searching for my entire life. Not just language. Not just knowledge. Confidence. And that confidence was about to lead me to the biggest surprise of all. Learning to be still. Have you ever been so busy running that you forgot how to just be? So consumed by the noise of your own thoughts that you couldn't hear the quiet voice inside you, the one that knew exactly what you needed? That was me, before the library taught me the most valuable lesson of all, that sometimes, the best thing you can do is absolutely nothing. Just be still. I had been coming to the library for almost a year. I had improved my English. I had made friends. I had found a community. But I still felt restless. I still felt like I was constantly chasing something, constantly trying to prove myself, constantly running from the fear that I wasn't enough. One afternoon, Mrs. Thompson found me pacing the aisles, looking for something to read but not really seeing the books. "You're stressed," she said. It wasn't a question. She could see it in my face, my shoulders, my restless energy. I nodded. "I can't stop," I said. "I feel like if I stop, everything will fall apart." Mrs. Thompson looked at me with those kind eyes and said something that changed my life. She said, "That's because you haven't learned to trust the stillness. Come with me." She led me to a quiet corner of the library I had never noticed before. It was a small room with soft lighting, comfortable chairs, and windows that looked out onto a peaceful garden. "This is the quiet room," she said. "No phones. No talking. No distractions. Just you and your thoughts." I sat down in one of the chairs, feeling awkward and uncomfortable. I had been running for so long that sitting still felt like a foreign language. But I stayed. And I listened. At first, the silence was loud. My thoughts raced. My heart pounded. I wanted to jump up and do something. But slowly, so slowly, the silence began to work its magic. I started to breathe more deeply. My shoulders relaxed. My mind stopped racing. And I realized something I had never realized before. I had been so focused on learning English that I had forgotten to listen to myself. I had been so busy trying to fit in that I had lost touch with who I was. And in that quiet room, in that beautiful library, I found myself again. I started coming to the quiet room every day. Just for 10 minutes at first. Then 20. Then an hour. I would sit in that comfortable chair, looking out at the garden, and I would just be. No pressure. No goals. No expectations. Just presence. And something incredible happened. My English improved. Not because I was studying harder, but because I was calmer. I was more present. The words came more easily. I stopped overthinking every sentence. I started speaking from a place of peace instead of a place of fear. Mrs. Thompson noticed the change. "You look different," she said one day. "You look peaceful." I smiled. "I am," I said. The library taught me something. It taught me that knowledge isn't just about reading and learning. It's about listening. To yourself. To the world. To the quiet voice that knows what you need. The Temple of Knowledge. Have you ever walked into a place and felt the weight of history pressing down on you? Felt the presence of all the people who had come before, seeking answers, seeking wisdom, seeking themselves? That was the feeling that washed over me one afternoon in the library. When I finally understood why U.S. libraries are like temples, and why that comparison is more than just a metaphor. I was sitting in my usual corner, reading a book about American history, when something caught my eye. A plaque on the wall, just above the entrance to the main reading room. It was old, made of bronze, and worn smooth by decades of fingers. I walked over to read it. And what I saw made my heart stop. Knowledge is the light that dispels the darkness of ignorance. This library is dedicated to the pursuit of truth, the celebration of wisdom, and the belief that every person deserves access to the world's knowledge. I read those words again and again, feeling tears well up in my eyes. Because in that moment, I understood something profound. This library wasn't just a building with books. It was a temple. A temple of knowledge. A sacred space where ideas were honored, where learning was revered. Where every person who walked through the door was treated with dignity and respect. In my country, knowledge was a privilege. A luxury. Only the wealthy, the powerful, the connected had access to books and education. But here, in America, knowledge was a right. A birthright. Every person, no matter their background, their language, their mistakes, could walk into a library and access the wisdom of the world. For free. Without judgment. Without barriers. I thought about Mrs. Thompson, who had welcomed me with open arms. I thought about the ESL group, where immigrants from all over the world gathered to learn together. I thought about my children, running through the children's section, their laughter echoing off the walls. And I realized that the library was more than just a building. It was a symbol. A symbol of what America could be. A symbol of hope. A symbol of the belief that every person deserves a chance to learn, to grow, to become. I walked through the library that afternoon, looking at it with new eyes. The high ceilings, the tall windows, the rows upon rows of books. The people sitting at tables, lost in their studies. The children curled up in corners, discovering new worlds. The immigrants, like me, finding their way. It was a temple. Not a temple of religion, but a temple of the human spirit. A place where the sacredness of knowledge was honored. And as I stood there, surrounded by the silence and the wisdom and the hope, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just learning English anymore. I was learning what it meant to belong. I was learning what it meant to be free. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that this library would forever be a sacred place in my heart. But the most beautiful lesson was still to come. And it came from the most unexpected source, a little girl who reminded me why knowledge is truly sacred. Knowledge is sacred. Have you ever looked at a place you had visited 100 times and seen it for the first time? Not the building, not the furniture, not the books, but the soul of it. The purpose of it. The sacredness of it? That's what happened to me one afternoon in the library, when a little girl's question made me realize that knowledge isn't just something you learn. It's something you honor. I was sitting in my usual corner, reading a book, when I noticed a little girl sitting across from me. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She was holding a picture book, her small fingers tracing the words on the page. And she was whispering to herself, sounding out each word slowly. The cat is on the mat. She looked up at me with big, curious eyes and said, "Do you like reading?" I smiled and nodded. "Yes, I do." And then she asked me a question that made my breath catch. "Why do you like it?" I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Why did I like reading? I had spent a year in this library, learning English, making friends, finding myself. But had I ever stopped to ask myself why? I looked around at the library, the tall windows, the rows of books, the people reading, the children learning. And I felt the answer rise up from somewhere deep inside me. Because knowledge is sacred, I said. Because every book contains a world. Because when you read, you're not just learning words. You're learning about people. About ideas. About life. And that is a gift that should never be taken for granted. The little girl stared at me for a long moment. And then she smiled, closed her book, and said, "I think you're right." She ran off to join her mother, leaving me sitting there, overwhelmed by the simplicity and beauty of that moment. Because in that little girl's question, I had found the answer I had been searching for my entire life. The library had taught me something profound. It had taught me that knowledge is not just information. It is freedom. It is power. It is connection. In my country, books were a luxury. Learning was a privilege. But here, in America, knowledge was a right. A sacred right. And the library was the temple where that right was protected and celebrated. I thought about everything the library had given me. The ESL group, where I found my voice. The children's section, where my children learned to love reading. The quiet room, where I learned to be still. The community, where I found belonging. And Mrs. Thompson, the librarian who saw me when I was invisible. I realized that the library was more than just a building. It was a symbol of everything good in the world. A symbol of hope. A symbol of equality. A symbol of the belief that every person, no matter where they come from, deserves access to knowledge. And that belief, more than anything else, is what makes America beautiful. I still go to the library every week. Not just to read, but to honor the sacredness of the space. To honor the knowledge inside. To honor the people who come seeking answers. And to remember that, no matter how broken my English was, no matter how lost I felt, I always had a place here. A place where knowledge is sacred. A place where I belong.